Well, good morning. And thank you for the invitation to come and share some time with you this morning and some thoughts. It's fun to be back and see so many friends and peers and so many emerging leaders of our specialty and our future. So this is a real delight for me. And it's fun to be able to follow Peter and Paloma. I think you'll see that there are so many themes that weave through our talks. You know, I reflect on Paloma's comments about mentorship being so critically important, and the fact that at any time we are both givers and receivers of mentorship. And Peter's points about managing time and making time for that creativity and for that thinking and for that strategizing, so critically important. So you'll see some common themes woven through my talk, but I thought today what I would do, given that I have most recently moved out of my long career as an academic anesthesiologist and intensivist, and really my identity as a clinician educator, into more of a physician executive position. So I wanted to share some thoughts with you as I reflect on my career journey, and thought I would start today with actually describing what is the job. What is it to be a physician executive? What are the things that we think about? How do we spend our time? Maybe then a little bit of a thought or discussion around what are these experiences and skills. So as young people are thinking about if this is something that I might want to do, and to echo what Peter said and Paloma said too, find something you're passionate about. Think about the work you want to do. Think about the problems you want to solve. So I want to share with you a little bit about what that is, and then we can talk about some of the pearls that I've learned along the way. So current landscape and trends. Really, these are the things that I spend my day, and all healthcare executives spend their time thinking about. It's really around economic pressure and uncertainty. I think the only thing we're sure of is that we're not sure what's coming, right? The uncertainty is really, and particularly with healthcare reform and the real political nature of healthcare financing, it's hard to predict exactly where we're going to be, but we know that the pressures are there, that reimbursement, that payer mix, all those things have real downward pressure on our economics. So thinking about how we continue to support our missions in that light. The social determinants of health and our aging demographics, I think, add to those economic pressures and our ability to deliver effective health care in that climate. Cybersecurity is a huge thing, not something I really had to think about much before. I did my HIPAA training and, was very dutiful and compliant, but now thinking about systems and how we serve up information, make it accessible to our clinicians with the threats that we see every single day. There are thousands, our health system filters out thousands and thousands of hacker hits, and our chief information officer just recently gave a presentation. It was mind-blowing to think about how many people out there are trying to get into our health systems. Our health information is far more valuable on the black market now than credit card information, and so it's a real threat. Physical security, I will say as well. Hospitals are very soft targets, and it's unfortunate we live in a climate where we have to think about how do we harden those targets, how do we provide safety without making our facilities feel like prisons, keeping certain people out and perhaps the feeling of keeping others in. The whole age of consumerism. How do we reach our patients and what they as healthcare consumers want? And there are many, many disruptions in that space. And so being strategic and thinking about where one's going to meet the consumers and how we develop the competencies to actually be able to provide. Drug shortages, we all face those drug shortages. Now being in charge of supply chain, it has a very different pressure than the one on the front lines, thinking about how am I going to deliver care today. Now it's on the other side, trying to think about how do I make sure our providers and our clinicians have the tools that they need to deliver the care that they do. Emergency preparedness. not just the security threats, but tornadoes, hurricanes, storms, now being responsible for the provision of ongoing care for the patients, but ongoing care then for the entire staff. And how do you think through those kinds of plans? Workforce burnout is a real issue. You all confront that in thinking about how do we restore that joy in practice? How do we really create an environment where people who do really amazing things and work hard, but we can support them in a way that brings meaning and purpose to their lives and creates more sustainability for the hard work that they do. And then the emerging technologies and how to keep up with it all, and trying to stay in that space and be able to deliver the dollars to make the capital investments to invest in those emerging technologies. And then thinking about how those emerging technologies will disrupt our workforce. So one of the things I'm dealing with right now is we have union negotiations this year. 2 of my big important contracts are up. And so the worry about, as we introduce robots in the finance office, or we do introduce cleaning robots, what is that impact on that workforce? And how are we thoughtful and sensitive to the fact that these are human lives and livelihoods? And thinking through, is it that we displace them, or does it give us opportunity to retrain them and replace them in other and maybe more meaningful ways? So all things that I spend a lot of time actually learning and addressing in my job. And the strategic imperatives, a little tongue-in-cheek, but honestly, all of us are compelled, right? Do more, do whatever we do better, and do it for less. And that really is, at the end of the day, how I focus my time and support our clinicians and our physicians to do that work. So the skills and experiences for people who may be budding C-suite executives out there, what are the kinds of things that, as I reflect on my career, that prepared me for a job as a COO? So honestly, being very operationally grounded. And I think as anesthesiologists and intensivists, we come by this rightfully. We are very globally minded, if you will, within our hospital communities. There's not a nook or cranny of our hospitals and health systems with which we don't interface. So I think that this is a real natural for anesthesiologists and critical care physicians in particular, thinking of my own background. Finance and accounting. Being able to know your way around a P&L and a balance sheet. And that's not something that as physicians we're typically very well trained in. In fact, when I went to medical school, I had a liberal arts and humanities background with some pre-med, never really took a business course. So I think Peter made the point, don't be afraid to invest in additional training and education. So, we just don't come by these skills and the vocabulary necessarily in the course of our medical training. So don't be afraid to, and actually more than don't be afraid, actually strongly consider that you're going to need to go get some additional tools to be an effective executive if this in fact isn't part of your skill set. It certainly wasn't part of mine prior to going for business training. Management, and what I mean by this, it's not just how to organize the work environment and do things right or in the right way. It's really around people. And how do you identify talent? How do you develop talent? How do you manage that talent? How do you inspire that talent? Right? You can't be a leader if you don't have any followers. And so that's a whole entire skill set. And I think it's important to have those kinds of experiences and to really be thoughtful about and mindful as you are given opportunities where you can manage groups of people and lead teams. Again, I think a very natural for anesthesiologists. But that's an important experience and skill set. I already mentioned talent development, learning how to identify the right talent, and I can't say I always got this right. So that is an important focus. How do you identify the right skills, and then how do you develop those people in ways that you're always thinking about succession planning, you're always thinking about upward mobility for your teams. People want to be developed and they want to learn and stretch in new ways. And so that's a critically important skill for leaders. And then, of course, how you influence people. right? We tend to be, as physicians, very data-driven, very grounded in evidence. Well, that's great. You have to have that, what I call the very rational skill set and the ability to talk about things that seem very rational or grounded in data and your analyses, but you have to remember you're dealing with people, and we are irrational, emotional beings as well. And so some of my early big faux pas were going hard charging with my plan, and a very solid plan, if I say so myself, except I wasn't thinking about what's this really going to mean to the people this is going to impact, and how are they going to shoot down what sounds like a bullet-clad plan. And so you've got to think about talking and addressing people and developing your strategies, understanding that people will react in very irrational, emotional ways, but that's equally important to having a plan based in data and evidence. Attributes. So this is something I think about when people ask me what makes a good leader. These are some things, and I've drawn these as a bit of a spectrum because I think good leaders are principled. You have to have your true north, right? I love the quote, if you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there. You know, that's not a good leader. A good leader knows where they're going and is very principled, but at the same time, it's not always a linear pathway to where we want to go and where we want to lead our teams. So one has to be pragmatic. And always, you know, being able to sway and move as necessary, not because the goal or the end game has changed, but because it may be necessary, a tactical move, still getting to my true north. And so good leaders know how to move between principled and pragmatic. Otherwise, you just blow in the wind and you're wish-washy, and people lose confidence in a leader like that. You need to be very strategic. You need to have the big picture. You need to have that 30,000, 50,000, 60,000 foot view. But you also have to be facile in the weeds, as I say. You've got to understand your operations. You've got to understand your finance, your revenue cycle. You have to understand the things that you're responsible for, even if and when you delegate and you have other good people tending to those things. You've got to be facile because you've got to understand when they are and aren't delivering, because it's going to have tremendous impact. So good leaders move in that space. As I mentioned earlier, we're very data-driven and being grounded in learning what data you need, understanding and being able to determine if it's valid, being able to analyze it, cut through it. But there are times where we don't have all the data that we want, and we can't be indecisive when we are dealing with ambiguity. And good leaders, I think, are able to move in that space. We often get selected for our positions by what we do, so that's what I call lead by doing, what projects you've led, what initiatives you've developed, what papers you've written, what grants you've been awarded. So we're often selected for our roles because of what we've done, but a good leader at one point makes that transition and you lead by coaching or lead by leading. And that's not a skill that's necessarily taught, but it's critically important as I reflect back on my transition. And I think it's important that leaders are courageous. You got to live up to your convictions. And yet you have to be humble, right? You have to understand you don't have all the answers. You've got to be a good listener, be willing to take input. And so those, I think, are really good attributes of leaders, and good leaders are able to live at both ends of that spectrum and transition as necessary. So as I think about my journey and advice or pearls, number one is focus on being excellent. I never ever set out to get the job I have today. I just was happy as a young physician being an excellent clinician and educator. It's what fed my soul. And my focus was being excellent in that space and being exceptional in that space. And it's through the excellence and your commitment to being where you are and doing your very best every day that people recognize that you have something. And that's where the opportunities to do something more will come from. So that leads to my second point, don't get over your skis. I have young people come to me all the time for mentorship and career advice, and it's one of the favorite things that I do. But people are already, barely out of residency or fellowship, and they're already aiming for the CEO job or something, or the dean's job. It's like, don't get over your skis. Don't get ahead of yourself. There's a lot of living to do and a lot of learning to do between where you are and where you think you want to go. The second piece of this is that, how do you know you want to be the dean or you want to be the CEO? Do you even know what those jobs entail? So the other thing I tell people is, don't focus on the titles on the door. Focus on the work you want to do and the problems you want to solve, because it may not necessarily align with how you like to spend your time. So that's what I mean by don't get over your skis. It's been said before, mentorship is everything. When I reflect on my career and the few people who were really instrumental in guiding my career, they saw things in me that I didn't see in myself. It's everything. Mentorship, the people in your lives that will open doors for you or push and nudge you in directions where you may not feel that you have the skill set or the ability. Trust in those people. And, as was said before, recognize that what you say and do matters. You never know who's watching, and you never know what kind of influence you're going to have on the people around you. And that's critically important, and that's something we all need to live up to. Don't be afraid to fail. It takes a lot of courage to step into these roles. And it's not easy, and you can feel very lonely and very vulnerable in some of these roles, and anybody in a leadership position knows that. But again, I think if you have that right combination of courage and humility, and you go in there thinking, okay, is this a job I can do? Do I have the resources and the skills and the wherewithal to do it? And when I've done it and I've been successful, will it have mattered to me? Will it have been important for me to have done this? I think those are good questions for you to ask. And don't be afraid to make mistakes and fail along the way, as long as you are willing to be honest and examine those failures and those mistakes and learn from them. We've all been there, but it does take being very vulnerable and making yourself very vulnerable to step into these leadership roles. And in the end, leadership is all about service. You may be the boss, but as I said, you can't be the boss or the leader if no one's willing to follow. And leadership is a huge investment. You serve your organization, you serve your teams, you serve your peers. It's really about service. And so think about that as you think about what it means to step into a leadership role. But with that, I think I'll stop with my comments. I understand we'll have time for questions and answers, so thank you for your attention.
Great. Thanks to all three speakers for those great talks. So we'll actually entertain questions from the audience. So we'll just ask people to, I guess, use those mics that are in the center there if you want to come up and ask questions to any of our panelists here. But just while we're waiting for some people to approach the mic here, I guess I'll get things started. So Dr. Nageli and Dr. Hill, I'll direct this to either you can answer, both of you, because you're both in very senior leadership positions in your respective organizations. So as a junior person, one thing I find often happens is I have senior folks coming to me saying, "You'd be perfect for this. I need you to do this for me." And that goes against, trying to maintain the focus that all three of you had spoken about. So as you, in a leadership position, how do you think we should best approach this as junior, or as assistant professors or as junior staff in your organizations? How would you best receive a no without taking it personally, I guess?
Okay, I'm sorry. That's not an easy one, because the question is what's the motivation, right? Ultimately, and so it could be really well motivated, and it could be an opportunity for you to really, it's like a perfect next step, right? On the other hand, it could be not really be well motivated and just fill the needs of the department, the hospital, or and they just need a warm body personally, basically to do that job, and it may really be a crazy time sink. And so one example that I've seen, for instance, in a lot of the young, energetic and passionate faculty who really don't know what to do. Sometimes they're sucked in writing a lot of like book chapters or so. So this is something and it may be too harsh that book chapters should only be written by full professors, but I think it gets to the point where it's like, this is not a good time and not a good investment of time and energy of a junior faculty, unless you're actually really experts in expertise. And this may be the case. You may have really rare training, that is you trained at NASA or whatever, and this is really applicable. No, I'm not kidding. This could be the case where you truly are the expert, then by all means write that book chapter. But more often than not, it's more to fill the needs of an organization than yours. On the other hand, ultimately we're soldiers, if you know what I mean, and so sometimes we just have to soldier up and say yes, So, but I think it needs to be a conversation, right? Especially if it's more like bigger leadership roles, fellowship director or associate program director. These where these are big roles, and a lot of time, and that's requires, I would say, conversation. Do you want to?
Sure. Yeah, I think it's a really good question, and I agree with Peter. Sometimes those opportunities aren't always in your best interest. So this gets back to where it's important that you define for yourself what are the problems you want to solve, what are the things that are really important to you. Is this busy work? Is this meeting a need? And sometimes that's fine. Being a good citizen and a good team player and fulfilling a need is fine. So you've got to size up. What is that kind of investment? And is it going to be an investment, as I said earlier? Can I do this successfully? Will I have what I need to do it? And when I'm done with it, will it have mattered? And so I think going through those three questions is critically important. I think about, one of my mentors who offered me the opportunity to create that preoperative assessment program. And for me, that was such a key to so many other things in my career. And so that was one where I was happy to have said, yes, absolutely yes. But there are other things that come along that just really, as I size them up, and it's hard, right? Because being asked by someone you respect, admire, or someone in an authority position, it can be very flattering. That has that sort of seductive pull that, gee, I'm being tapped for something. But, resist being flattered. Because when you're talented, and this is a room of really talented people, they will come, and they will come fast and furious, and you've got to be, it may not seem that way in your seats today, but you will have ample opportunity. So maybe the important thing is, how do I politely decline without shutting the door? So this is also advice I've been asked to give people, and I say I think the way to talk to someone who's offered you some opportunity, when you've gone through that soul searching and decided it's not for you, is to say, I'm really flattered. I aspire to such and such kind of opportunities, but I think this isn't quite aligned with what I want to do, by signaling that you're thoughtful about what you want, by signaling that you do have other aspirations and maybe providing a little bit of insight into what those are, and then to politely decline and say, but if you have something, in these areas, would love to hear about those opportunities. So it's a way to graciously get out of something without shutting the door to other kinds of possibilities. You need to signal that this is something that you do have other aspirations. So hopefully that's a little helpful.
That's great. Thanks.
Hi, my name is Mike Mathis. I'm a cardiac anesthesiologist at the University of Michigan. I just finished a T32 and intimidated to be launching into a K ward. And one of the problems that I think all of the panelists spoke to is forming a mentorship team and finding the right mentors. And one of the challenges that I've encountered, and I'd love to hear more about what our panelists think about this, is you need mentors to fill different, there's different qualities about mentors that make them great mentors for you. And you'll find that no one mentor has all of these qualities. So naturally, you'll have a mentorship team. When you have a mentorship team, I've sometimes been struggling with the cohesiveness of that team. So sometimes one mentor will not know exactly what another mentor is advising you on, and how to reconcile that. How to have mentors understand where they may fit into your career plan, and be able to give you, rather than individual mentorship advice, kind of a cohesive message. So I'd love to hear anything about that from each of our panelists.
I can start with that because I have an anesthesiologist, an obstetrician, and a health services researcher. So I think the key for me has been, because everyone's coming from such diverse backgrounds, is making sure that everyone's on the same page. So obviously Cindy Wong was my anesthesiologist mentor. She is a phenomenal physician scientist and has done a lot organizationally. So she has a certain pathway that she saw my career going. But Jane Hall, my patient safety mentor, Romana, my disparities mentor, they all thought different things. So my key was getting everyone in the same room together or getting them on the phone together regularly. And for the most part, people that mentor you really want to help you. You know, they're passionate about you. They want to see you succeed. So ask someone else to do the scheduling for you, because I found sometimes dealing with their schedules is like a nightmare in its own. But make sure you find a time where everyone can be on the phone together, so that way if someone says, I really think you need to do X, but everyone else says you shouldn't because it's going to be too much time and it's not really going to advance your career, they're all together and then they can like talk it out amongst themselves. Like, I'm a huge fan of when you need to say no, like Laureen said, say, thank you so much for this opportunity, but my mentors really thought that, I should focus on X, Y, or Z instead. So, but please think of me in the future. So that's what I did. I just got everyone on the phone together, because then there's consensus amongst them.
Another good one. I think, so there are certain scenarios, right? The easiest one is you have a primary mentor in your department who is also, you work, on that research, That's fairly straightforward, because this person can advise you both on the research, right, to advance the research, become, an expert in that field, and also advise you how to advance, in our specialty, right? The challenge is, let's say you do research that is outside of a specialty, or the primary mentor, the research mentor is cardiologist or OBGYN or because they truly do not understand our specialty, right? Or the kind of conferences you should go, for instance, attend the AUA meeting every year, they would never know this, right? So then it becomes a little bit difficult. I do think you need a primary mentor, without a doubt, who takes ownership. But I understand how challenging this can be if this person is outside of the specialty, right? You have to also understand how K awards were designed. They were designed that it was with the PhD model in mind, right? So you work in a lab. The lab is funded by our grants, and that's why the Ks are funded that way. It would be a postdoc, a fellow who would basically get a token amount of money to do his or her own research and have the salary, taken care of. That was the model, right? So you had one cohesive group, and this would be the mentor, right? And nowadays, especially in clinical research, that is really not the case. So it's, I agree. I think if there's really a divergence of opinions, you probably need to get the group together in the room, or just identify one primary mentor and say, I will really follow your advice on X, Y, and Z, and make it clear to the others. I know it may ruffle some feathers with others. I get this. Not an easy one.
One quick addition to the comments on mentorship. I think we have to be careful. Terms have a lot of meaning, right? So the difference between a mentor and someone who may be a career consultant, right? And trying to think in your mind, mentors, and I think it was said before by both Paloma and Peter, was that, they're vested in your success. There's a personal relationship there. Personal professional relationship, but there's something to that mentorship relationship, and that's why I think those assigned mentor programs, while completely well intended, these relationships have to grow organically. And so it may be that if you approach this, that individual is going to provide research consultancy to this group. It goes back to what Peter said, it's bidirectional, and there is a responsibility of those who are seeking the input of a mentor. And so if you think about when you bring in, or your department or somebody brings in a consultant, they have a series of this is what we'd like to achieve, this is what we have, this is where we're having problems. And if you bring that to that mentorship relationship, you may find you get more back. But sometimes when we use the term mentor, it's kind of like they're going to direct things for me. They're going to, and they've got my best interest in mind. And I think one has to be careful about the nature of these relationships.
Hello, my name's Kate Leslie. I'm from Melbourne in Australia, and with Hilary Grocott, we're doing a session on publication at the end of the day. My question is around being a clinician scientist with the emphasis on clinician. So nobody wants to be the funny old professor with the Nobel Prize who is dangerous in the operating room. All of us as clinician scientists by obligation are working part-time as anesthesiologists. I have a few ideas about how to be a good anaesthetist and be a good researcher, and there are loads of reasons why you need to be great clinicians in order to be credible in your department. But I wondered if anyone on the panel would like to share their ideas about how to remain a competent anesthesiologist while doing great science.
Okay. This is something that I think is particularly the case in the U.S. And I think for most of us who either Europe or Australia, that strict, for instance, career development grant obligation, to the federal government, where you need to, or an affair grant, need to spend 75% in research. So this, I think, is for the physician scientists who do lab-based research, I think is really critical. Because I think ultimately they will be judged to compete against full-time basic scientists, and I think the spending 4 days a week in a lab is really important. That's probably the only way to succeed. For clinician scientists, where you have then research coordinators and some of the mechanics of doing research you can outsource into professional hands, you may actually not need 75% protected research time. But we, I think, have that kind of hard rule. So in terms of advice how to maintain, I think first of all, I think you should come out of residency as a good anesthesiologist. That would be a good start. And then it's more probably maintenance. So I know from just our own example at WashU that some individuals then really choose to only work in a very specific clinical area. Like not saying anything confidential. Mike Crowder, for instance, elected mostly to work in neuroanesthesia. Some of the more junior only do now critical care to spend 25 to 30% of his or her time only in critical care, and they, I think, still provide outstanding clinical care. But it's a challenge if you have to work, if the expectation is like you need to be at expert level in cardiac, in critical care, and that I think gets difficult. So the bottom line is probably pick one area and then try to really become an expert in that area. Understanding that you, with 1 day a week in the OR or two, it would be very hard to go too broad. Yeah,
I agree completely. And I think also that as you get older, you need to narrow your scope of practice even further. And I think it's good to really think about trying to do a subspecialty that is not highly technical. And one that maybe is more, cerebral. And neuroanesthesiology is a good example of that. And you have to be, I think, bear in mind that you need to do some of the procedures and not give them all to the residents. And that's one of the trickiest things about being an attending, is stealing procedures off residents. But I think they understand that.
Yes.
two final things. You need someone to call when you don't know what to do. My sister's an anesthesiologist, and we're always on the phone, what do you do about this? And the other is to find someone to tap you on the shoulder and say, look, it's time to go, or it's time to upskill. So thank you for your remarks.
Hello. So I think I'm not a physician. I'm only a PhD, and that's probably good for everybody.
Out.
Sorry. So my question is, does a PhD fit into an anesthesiology department? Considering that I have no clinical background, and is this a going into anesthesiology research as a neuroscientist fit with the larger goals of the field?
Absolutely.
But
without a doubt.
Yeah.
I think if I speak from the mini period of being a chair, I think what a chair may look for is that you're a first-rate scientist, or have a potential to become a first-rate scientist, right? And that you need to ideally fit into the specialty in some way, right? That can be loosely defined, right?
Yeah.
But think about pain, right? I mean that is a whole field where you can be as translational as you want to be, right? Super basic pain mechanism, and we at WashU we had the example that even outstanding PhD scientists then started to apply some of their findings in some phase 1 or phase 2 trials. So this whole spectrum. So absolutely yes, absolutely without a doubt. Yes.
thank you.
Don't be shy. We have 5 more minutes.
Actually, I do have one question. This is really for all the panelists, but was there a time when that you can think of in your careers when your particular interest and your passion, which as you all relate is so important, didn't necessarily align with that of your mentors or with that of your department? And did you adapt yourself, or was that a time when you decided to change direction or just keep looking?
So I can answer that. So like I said, I had an anesthesiologist mentor, I had a health services research mentor, I had an obstetrician mentor. And I think because I love research and I love working with students, a lot of times as junior faculty, I would get can you help X, Y, and Z with their project? And can you help them with their project? And one of my mentors, again, who was my boss, was telling me, will you help Elizabeth Lang with this project? And so then you just have to take it on because, she's your boss, you have to say yes, and you can't really, and then you have your other mentors kind of yelling at you for not doing other things. So I think that it's good and bad in that it does help you develop your science in areas that are not in just your wheelhouse. I think it's always good to have a little bit of diversity, but too much is a bad thing. So again, going back to the saying no, getting everyone together and then helping other people help you say no is good. But yeah, I definitely have had to negotiate the being told to do things that you don't want to do, and then having to figure out how do you keep that focus that Peter was talking about.
So I would say, yes, there are research careers that are linear or sort of linear. And I really don't have real data to support this, but my guess is most of our careers are nonlinear. It may go, a little bit this way and this way. My own example, I started as a resident. I did my residency in Vienna, and there was a very, I would say, robust clinical research, and most residents were at some point engaged in clinical research. But I always wanted to do basic science, so that's why I actually came to WashU and worked for 2 years as a research fellow, just basically full-time basic science. And I really thought I would continue this, but then you're back in the OR, you really enjoyed the sort of the clinical research questions. For me, it was really back and forth. And then I joined WashU in 2005, and within a year, I basically decided to leave basic science. So it's completely non-linear, and so. Did this hurt my career? Possibly, because you try to become an expert in a field and then, you're not pursuing this, and so probably. But there's, in the end, it's you need to be happy, right? You need to find your passion, and if you realize this is really not the way, it's okay to change directions. It really is,
Hi, my name is Caitlin Sutton, pediatric and obstetric anesthesiologist. I've gotten a lot of great advice from both Dr. Toledo and Dr. Hill over the years, most especially from Dr. Hill, who told me that another year of training is something you will never regret, which is true, and she has exemplified that for me. Speaking of extra years of training, I wanted to ask you, all of you have done things in your training that, as you were mentioning, weren't necessarily linear, an MPH, an MBA. If you know that that's on the horizon for you, you know it's something that is going to improve what you're passionate about and your ability to answer those questions, what would you recommend about the timing of doing that? So I'm a first year attending, so I know eventually I want to do an MA in ethics or maybe beyond that. But it seems quite early to say, I've done this for 1 year, now I want to start pursuing that. So what would you recommend about timing as far as those things?
Hello, it's good to see you.
Good to see you too.
In terms of the timing, I don't know that I would be prescriptive in terms of the number of years. I think it's important to have a little bit of experience under your belt because you draw on that as you learn in whatever domain. And even in business school, I wasn't running a business, but I was able to draw on a lot of my experiences. And I happened to be out of residency, I think 8 years when I started my MBA. But the most important thing to think about in thinking of the timing is, will I have the opportunity to apply my newfound knowledge and skills? Mm-hmm. Otherwise, it becomes a piece of paper on a wall. And I think that's the critically important thing. So if you're thinking about something in ethics, make sure you have a seat at the ethics committee or, on the consult service or in teaching in the school or some way that you are able to take your newfound learning and apply it. That's where I think it's going to have the greatest impact.
Great.
I can completely mirror this. So I do think for leadership training or MBA, the advice, for instance, I got is do not do it unless it could have been if you decide to do this early on because it's a huge time commitment, and if you're not really into see yourself as truly a business career, then the advice from leadership coaches I had is like, do not do an executive MBA unless it's more like the path that Laureen did, right, where it's really going to either industry or hospital or healthcare systems. On the other hand, in terms of research training, as early as possible. So I think if I had the opportunity as a medical student myself, this Teal 1 year, that is a 5th year, I would highly recommend this. Of course, most of you are probably past that, but I think because this will make all the subsequent research better. So waiting how to get formal training in how to do research is not a good idea as early as possible, because it will make everything you do later better, from a methods perspective. And so I think that should really I think inform your decision also. Don't wait with this. Now with a master in bioethics, that's something I'm probably not really qualified to answer. What the right time is. I probably don't have a smart answer for that.
I would echo that in terms of when I did my training. So I knew I wanted to have an academic career, but at the same time, I had just had my only daughter, and I was doing the Alzheimer lecture, which is this really comprehensive review. You have to give the keynote lecture. So I was getting my MPH, I was doing night classes, I was burning the candle on both ends. There's never a good time in your life, Now I think about it, I go home, I make dinner, I do math homework with my daughter. If you think about it, you really have to do the things that you're passionate about. And if you really want to get the master's, just go ahead and do it, because you make time. At the end of the day, you will always make time for what's important. And like Peter said, the training will amplify your research so much more. And I think you almost need to show that you have gotten additional training to be competitive for grant funding these days. So I highly echo the go ahead, do it. If it's even a consideration in your mind, just make time for it and go ahead.
Thank you all. That's really great advice. Appreciate it.
Great. So with that, I think we'll draw the session to a close. I'd like to thank all three speakers for sharing your experiences, and we've all benefited from that. Thank you very much. That was great. That was really good speech.
Oh, you do?